Friends, please be seated. We are going to start the session soon. I request our YI friends to be seated. Please, please be seated. I request all our YI friends to be seated. We'll start the session soon. Rick.
All of you take your seats, please. We can begin quickly. Take your seats, please. Take your seats. People at the back. Vicon, take your seat, please.
Right, Mitanshu, you can sit down. All right. Can we have everybody take their seats, please? Okay, can we have Rajeshna take a seat, please? Come on. Rajesh, come on. Tell again. Announce it. Okay.
Good evening, everybody. No response yet. I feel like a class teacher, standing in a classroom and going, hey, good evening, ma'am. Come on, some more energy, young Indians. Okay, I'll take what I can get at this point, at least. So as a lot of you know, we've come to the final session of the day, and a final-ish session for that. Whoever is thinking there's no alcohol later, there is. So yeah, so I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our final speaker, Mr. Maruf Raza, who is. Just give me a moment. Sorry. Thank you. Maruf Raza is a well-known media commentator on global and national security issues. Currently a consulting editor for strategic affairs for Times TV Network, where he hosts this weekend a strategic affairs a show called Latitude on Times Now and The Defenders on Sansad TV. He also appears regularly on primetime TV shows on Times Now networks, as I already mentioned. So without further ado, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Maruf Raza to the stage.
Okay. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm obviously very happy and honored. Maps. Okay, thanks. I am very, very pleased to be sharing with you some thoughts about China. It's a subject we are all keen to know a bit about, if not more. See, China, even now, is not adequately understood in India. And a lot of chest thumping that goes on about China is not based on any serious study. Hand-me-down knowledge, I was one of those also. But when the Chinese intruded in Galwan, you know, before you know, television sucks you in my case. I've been on TV the whole day today because sadly, former long-serving Japanese Prime Minister has just been assassinated today, Shinzo Abe. So Japan was a subject that I had studied a bit when I was doing one of my master's degrees in London, Japanese security. So I had some idea, and Shinzo Abe actually made Japan take a turn away from his pacifist approach, a constitution that forbids Japan from having a more aggressive military posture. So I was able to fill in, and what the anchors wanted just you to keep rambling on because they don't know what to do themselves. This was the case also, you know, when I was to go off to the Andamans years ago when I was working with NDTV, 95, 96. And the Chinese had begun to have lookout posts in the Andamans looking at Indian maritime activity. There was a place some of you might have read about called Coco Islands. So Rajdeep said to me, Rajdeep Sardesai, boss, will you be able to go there and get us something unusual? I said, let's give it a try. And here I am, all packed, ready to go to the airport. And suddenly I'm told, you know, Sonia Singh now, Sonia Verma she used to be, she shouted out, and I was just saying bye to one or two of my friends there because I left the army and joined NDTV. Maruf, what does thermonuclear test mean? I said, it's a bloody nuclear test. And what does this mean? This much kiloton and this much. I said, but why are you asking? Because she said, I think India has just gone nuclear. So I looked at the news feed and I said, oh my God. She said, listen, can you just go into the studio? So, you know, the choice was between giving information to the country and going to the airport in time to catch a flight. Anyway, I went in, and I won't share the name of the anchor with you. But she said, you know, I don't know anything. Just tell me what questions to ask. So I wrote 2, 3 questions. I said, just ask those questions and I'll keep rambling on. And so somehow for 1 hour, I was able to keep the Indian audience educated, what it means to go nuclear and la la la. Likewise, when China intruded, I knew a bit more. But again, suddenly Galwan had become a household name. And everyone wanted, so what are they doing? Why are they intruding? This is our territory. So I said, you know, just because I walk in here and say the Radisson Hotel is my territory, it doesn't become that. You know, there is a rule in military terms that is followed, and that is called, you know, no man's land. And in no man's land, you grab what you keep. And this is what precisely China did in the 50s. So if you look at this map here, see Aksai Chin, much as many of our political leaders would say, this is our territory. But you can walk into a large farm estate and say that farmland was my grandfather's. He says, do you have a piece of paper? Do you have any documentation? Nobody can produce that. And they accept you to believe that belong to your grandfather. So likewise, you see, our claims on territories with China, some of them, there is documentation. Some of them, there is no proof. I mean, it's my claim versus his claim. So what happens in such situations? You grab what you keep and you stand your ground and say, now see if you can push me off, which is what we have done in the Siachen Glacier. See, the Siachen Glacier is, you see where Aksai Chin is written and where Ladakh is written, between the red and green dot, there is a line that goes on top. Left of that line is a Siachen Glacier. Now, technically, this was all India before Pakistan came into being or modern day China became aggressive. But at that point of time, you know, interestingly, let me see if, I don't think we have it here, but see where Daulat Beg, Oldie and Karakoram Pass is written, all those areas fell as part of India. But, you know, in historical terms, in age-old systems of warfare that don't apply in cities here, but you talk to soldiers, you finally, as I always say, and I was told there would be some odd questions on Agniveers also, but as I always say, you know, one aspect about Agniveers that comes up, we'll have a high-tech army. I said, friends, no army in the world is more high-tech than the Americans. But they couldn't put boots on the ground in Afghanistan, so they had to retreat in humiliation. So in soldiers' parlance, it is the last few hundred yards of victory have to be measured on foot. You have to go and put your bloody flag. You can flash any number of maps and any PowerPoint presentations. But the guy on the ground says, I don't recognize you. In fact, flags remind me, I will be throwing in anecdotes as we go along. You know, in the 1962 conflict that I will come to while we talk, there was a Ladakhi, and the Ladakhis are really, really tough. You know, the best of American Green Berets and Force Delta, when they came for doing mountain training with the Ladakhis here, they gave up. Because these guys are like goats, mountain goats. And if you haven't seen a mountain goat, you won't understand what I'm saying. But they don't get tired. In high altitude, they don't run out of breath. You know, if you go to Ladakh and you get out of an aircraft and you try and be too much of a champion, that night your body will come back to Delhi. Because you can't take that altitude. You know, there used to be a TV anchor called Minnie Menon, right? Her sister tried that. The body received by the family the next day in Bombay. Because my father was also in the army. He spent a lot of time in this part of Arunachal. Normally, the army regards high altitude as 9,000 feet. After that, the soldiers get every day a shot of rum to keep warm. My father was a teetotaler and so am I. So he was at 14,000 feet. That's more than the Siachen base camp. And he was there for 4 years. So when I went to Siachen to make a documentary and I spoke to some soldiers, it was summer months. It was minus 15 out there. So I said, how do you feel? He says, feeling very warm. We wanted minus 40 with 100 kilometers wind speed, then we are comfortable. So the human body can adapt. So this guy who was there in Ladakh, ahead of Ladakh, the highest airfield in the world is a place called Daulat Beg Oldie. Can you see that where C Company Jats is written DBO? They aren't airfield in the classic sense that you can just fly in there and get out and the conveyor belt will be there with your baggage. They are stony, rough tracks on which the IAF pilots land. Your tire can burst. Because when I did a film on the INS Virat, after every flight takes off and flight lands, you know, the aircraft carrier, a whole group of men walk across the runway looking for a single pebble or a pin. Because if the tire bursts, the aircraft will go into the sea. Why in the sea? Because the aircraft throws off all its fuel before landing. Because if it skids, it'll blow up the whole aircraft carrier. And here you have people landing on those airfields where there are stones, pebbles, gaddas, everything, but they still land. So that is the kind of grit the Indian soldier has shown to hold on to what we believe is India's. Now, how did this whole narrative, I'm giving you a bit of a curtain raiser to try and create sensitivity in your mind that India is very different from this India. That India is also India, like the Indian soldier that went up to the Kargil tops. You know, many of them were going to attack the Pakistanis with Alisha Chenai's song in tape recorders. Serious. It was, "This is my India. I love my India." So the places that we heard of, we only heard of when fighting began there. Likewise, I'll be very honest, I hadn't heard of Galwan till Galwan happened. Although there is a family in J&K, in Ladakh. Now, Ladakh is a separate state, but family in Ladakh, their name is Galwan. It was after that guy's grandfather that the British named that confluence of two rivers, Galwan Valley. Now, how did this whole narrative come to be? So what are the two areas of dispute? There is an Aksai chain, where you see that, as an artist would say, it's yellow ochre. It's not orange, it's not khaki. I used to paint, so I know the color. And here is the other, is the McMahon, there's a spelling error there. It's McMahon line, M-C-M-A-H-O-N. Now, these are the two boundaries that our Foreign Office doesn't want to address because they don't know what to do with it. So, much as Nehru was a strong proponent that he would run India's foreign policy, because Mahatma Gandhi became famous for non-cooperation, so Nehru wanted his signature message to be non-alignment. And therefore, when Americans offered India, when India became independent, an alignment with the Americans, Nehru dismissed it. A lot of things could have come out of it. One of them would have been a place in the Security Council. We were offered that also. The great Panditji decided, no, our time will come when it will come. And gave it to China. The rest is history. Okay. So, Pandit Nehru also believed that all this was part of India because we were part of British India. And the British left behind a subcontinent, and we would make it run the way the British left behind. And one of his limitations was that he was too busy with the process of nation building. So therefore, he could not get himself to go into details. And you know, boundary marking is the business of details. What we cherish now, the India here, I recently do quite a few YouTubes. They record 8 times now and put it on Times Digital. Some of them get good hits, 500,000 like that. In one of them, I said in Hindi, because sometimes do it in Hindi also. I said, agar Fauj nahi hoti, to Bharat azad na hota. Because at least in those front lines, you have to give it to the soldier for holding on to every inch of territory that you were sent to defend. There was a soldier, I mean, I did a TV series called Tales of Valor. In that, I brought out his story. He was a Ladakhi. You know, everybody went off from DBO when the fighting kind of eased off, looking for slightly warmer place. This guy was told, you look after the post. He stood at that bloody place for 6 months alone, living off a jerrycan or 2 of kerosene to heat himself up in Ladakhi winter, my God. and eating on bits and pieces and killing and all. Even yaks to go there would die. That is how fierce was the DBO. And he stayed and went, and every day he would hoist the flag of India and salute. And he lived through it. He lived through it. And many people don't know his story. I told his story on television. You see that DBO there. So it's around those areas the Chinese intruded. So when this whole thing happened, I said, I must study China more. And when I started reading, more I got interested, more I made my notes. And in the COVID period, I produced this book of mine, Contested Lands, which I believe has done very well. So what is the problem? The problem is our claims versus Chinese claims in Aksai Chin and our claims versus Chinese claims on McMahon Line. Now, you see this part of India, when you see the map of India and you see that hook, you see the map of India and see that hook. You see that area was never accepted even by the British to belong to India. It was an assumed boundary. The British had a role in defining this part of South by Arunachal Northeast Frontier Agency. So what happened was, just briefly, in 1865, a British cartographer, his name was W.H. Johnson. He was an Anglo-Indian. And he was unhappy how the white man treated him. So the Maharaja of Kashmir kind of got him on his side and told him, you make my boundaries as far away as you can. And I will award you with even post-retirement benefit. So usne lakeer khich di, right? He broke the line. It's just like how India was partitioned. The British got a lawyer called Cyril Ratcliffe. Ratcliffe was a London barrister, never stepped into India. When he came into Delhi, he got a Delhi belly. So he said, yaar, it's too bloody hot and difficult for me to go outside. Just give me the maps, I'll just draw the lines. And that's how Pakistan and India came to be. So this whole line where Pakistan is written and on the left of it is the Ratcliffe line. In Amritsar, the tamasha that takes place every evening, it's on the Ratcliffe line. And that line was drawn up till where it is written Islamabad, right of that. But then Pakistan took advantage, attacked us. We were righteous. We didn't send in our forces till such time Kashmir acceded to India legally. When we sent in, Pakistan had already occupied parts of Kashmir, which is now known as POK, all this area. The line abruptly ends at a height called NJ 9842, which is a hill mountain top. And NJ 9842 is somewhere. And that was the end of two efforts to define the boundary of India and Pakistan. So there was the Karachi Agreement of 1st January 49, where both sides signed a document. And after the humiliation of Bangladesh, Bhutto agreed, okay, let's do a permanent boundary. So the ceasefire line became the line of control. And the line of control also ended in NJ 9842. But then China prodded Pakistan. Let white guys occupy this area and give us a connect with the shaded area to the shaded area is with China. Okay. We got wind of it. For once, Raw got it right. And they found out everywhere else they've been sleeping, right? They found out that Pakistan had gone and bought 3,000 mountaineering shoes in Europe. And 3,000 shoes means a brigade. And a brigade means 3,000 men. And where will they use it? They can only use it on those adverse heights of Siachen. So Pakistan was preempted by us, that we helicoptered and walked and put troops there. The first lot that went in still are friends of mine. Some of them didn't bathe and change clothes for 30 days. Because they just said, go and plant the bloody flag, then come back. But then it was said, no, stick it out, man. Those guys are all over the place. So that is how we occupied what is the Soltoro Heights, and the Siachen Glacier flows below that. Pakistan is on the other side, right? And they say we are at Siachen. And Pakistani journalists are taken to another glacier and told that is Siachen. And they say, Janab, मैं तो Siachen glacier पे खड़ा हूँ. तो मेरे को एक पाकिस्तानी मिल गया. I was in a debate. I was in London, one of the Arnab Goswami debates. So one Pakistani general said, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, we have a claim on Siachen. So my turn came to speak. I said, General Sahab, आपने खुदा का नाम ले लिया है. अब थोड़ा सच भी बोल लीजिए. He says, क्या मतलब जनाब? मैंने कहा सियाचिन तक तो आप पहुंचे ही नहीं. So they didn't know where to look. But the fact is that that is what we did in Siachen, what China did in the 50s. They occupied the Aksai Chin because not a bloody blade of grass grew out there. In fact, Panditji was told, so he said, why should we take it seriously? Not a blade of grass grows there. So some minister told him, Panditji, not a blade of hair grows on your head. Will you give your head away also? Right? Okay. So, anyway, on a more serious note, Pandit Nehru was of the view that we must keep the Chinese happy. And whatever the Chinese wanted, we gave. So the Chinese wanted us to remove posts here. Not trading posts. You know, one slow-moving caravan of yaks traveled there over 6 months and then put up a post there and generally traveled in good weather, not the winters. Now, there was a British officer. He was a character, Lieutenant Colonel Young Husband. And he's a bit of a legend in England. He took on an expedition to explore Tibet from here. And Lhasa. Lhasa is the Tibetan capital. And rough weather and everything, but he disappeared for 2 years. So people thought he'd been killed in the weather. Just like a very dear friend of mine went hunting for Prabhakaran in Sri Lanka and we lost him for 2 years. Then one fine day he emerged in my life. I said, Shambhu, I thought you were dead. He said, no, sir, I just disappeared. So the same thing. Colonel Young Husband went there and came back and told the Viceroy of India that Tibet has a place called Lhasa. And there are enormous riches there and enormous historical wealth of information and, all this alternative treatment and everything. I think we should. So the Viceroy, in his wisdom pronounced, okay, so we should define who owns Tibet. So that exercise to define the boundaries of Tibet began under a guy called Lieutenant Colonel Henry McMahon. Now, McMahon, as somebody once wrote, was a character. Burned in the furnace of South Asia. He was your classic imperialist who had defined the borders of Pakistan with Afghanistan that came to be known as the Durand Line, but actually it should have been the McMahon Line. But there's already a McMahon Line which came into being. So he was given the job to define the outer boundaries of Tibet. You see, this is all China. Now, this is what we know of today. But at that time, China was very keen to take over all of Tibet because China saw a lot of water and natural wealth there. Almost all of Asia's rivers originate in Tibet. And you know how important water is, we all know. It has a lot of uranium wealth. So the Chinese had started at later stage doing nuclear tests there. So unfortunately, most of the underwater areas of Tibet are contaminated with nuclear waste. But what the Chinese wanted was a kind of connect and control this area. Because this is where lay uranium. And the Russians had begun to explore uranium way back in the 30s and 40s. Mao Zedong took over China in 49 after his long march for 15 years from 34 to 49. And he defined what would be China's goals. So he says Tibet is the palm of China's hand. And its 5 fingers are Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, Arunachal. Get them all. So that has become a fatwa for the Chinese. They have to go by that. So the Chinese began to eye Tibet, but the Russians didn't eye Aksai Chin really, but all of Tibet. But the Russians didn't let go of Aksai Chin until 1949, when they did their first nuclear test in a place of Pakistan called Semipalatinsk. And Mao Zedong believed that unless he had nuclear weapons, nobody would take him seriously. He had the wisdom to realize that our people took very long, but they thought people will take us seriously if we fast. Right? But anyway, so Mao Zedong was on the feet of Khrushchev in Russia and crawling. Get a boss, make me great. So Khrushchev said, under certain conditions, that you will become the strongest ally of Russia. You will confront the Americans in Korea. You will become the joint Russia-China combine against the world. Strangely, it's happening again. Right? And therefore, you will give me the kind of support I need in world forums. I will give you nuclear know-how. So nuclear know-how was passed to the Chinese and the mines were passed to the Chinese. And obviously the Chinese quietly saw wisdom in it and decided it's all in Aksai Chin. You must control it. Now the 2 sensitive regions for China, which they can't control effectively, and they call everybody terrorists out there, is Tibet and Xinjiang, which is Xinjiang. And in those 2 regions, they do all sorts of human rights abuses. We all know that. I don't want to go into details, but they're very harsh. And they took on control of Aksai Chin. So by the time an Indian expedition under Captain Rajendra Nath, later General Rajendra Nath, he was my commandant at the IMA there. He went there and he found all those bloody Chinese loitering around. He came and gave a report. But the report was made classified. It is still classified. Right? Because Nehru and others didn't want the people of India to know that the Chinese were being aggressive and they didn't have the stomach to take them on. Then there was another guy, also a Nath. His name was Wing Commander Jaggi Nath. Earlier was Squadron Leader Jaggi Nath. And he got 2 Mahavir Chakras, one in 62 war and one in 65, which is very rare. His MVC and bar. And he's alive. I've spoken to him on the phone. He was told carry out reconnaissance missions. So he undertook a reconnaissance mission from Ladakh, Aksai Chin, and came right down up to this side where Dokulam Nathula is written. And he brought air photography pictures. He was taken by the air chief to go and meet Krishna Menon, Nehru's intellectual mentor, and the second worst defense minister of India. The worst was Antony. Okay. So he, and Kerala has the dubious distinction of producing the worst 2 defense ministers. Okay. So Krishna Menon just looked at him. He says, what did you see? He says, I saw Chinese. They fired at my aircraft. He said, okay, I don't want to hear more. Go. So this guy was appalled. He says, what kind of a guy is he? When defense minister says, go, you go. You're a bloody wing commander. You know, there's a pot of plant on the doorstep. So he quietly went. But he went and gave an interview to a historian called Claude RP, who's still alive. And he's written in detail. So whatever I'm telling you, these are facts. And you can check them all on the internet. So the evidence was there. But what happened was that the information that he brought was passed down from India to Washington. because very few people know that between 1949 and 62, all important documents and files from Nehru's office were being passed on to the CIA. 3 distinguished ambassadors of India have written this in 3 different books. I've quoted them all in my book. The CIA would pass this on to MI5, MI6. The head of MI6 was a romantic character called Kim Philby, who later became a Russian spy. He was out of the Cambridge 5. 4 were known who found out Russian spy. 5th one, they never know. They always keep in. Britain has an obsession with spies. So every year in the summers, you'll get one big essay in a newspaper, the 5th man. Now, who the bloody hell was the 5th man? They haven't found out even 75 years later. Anyway, Philby passed it on and eventually left his job as the head of British intelligence, MI6, to which Bond reports. And he settled in a bloody dasha in Russia. That was his gift for giving them all the gyan. And Russia passed this information to China that they've got photographs of your nuclear reactor. So they attack them and break their confidence before they expose you to the world. So that is why one of the reasons Mao was in a hurry to attack India. Secondly, Nehru was gaining in stature internationally. Mao wasn't. So he wanted to teach Nehru a lesson, not India a lesson. Thirdly, India had begun to have very strong links with American intelligence. Nehru didn't want to engage with them because Nehru didn't go fully into their trap. But the Dalai Lama, when he escaped from Tibet, the CIA organized his escape. And therefore, on 30th March 1949, when he arrived inside India, near Darjeeling, there's a town called Kalimpong, which was always buzzing with spies. There were all sorts of these Tibetan monks walking around but passing information. He arrived, he was received by MP Menon, the uncle of former Foreign Secretary Shiv Shankar Menon. MP Menon was from the Foreign Office, MEA, but Pandit Nehru was heading MEA, said, I don't have any idea of his escape. So that much contact he had with the situation on the ground. Anyway, finally we gave the Dalai Lama sanctuary in Dharamshala. But this upset the Chinese further. It upset their calculations to stake full claim over Tibet. The other area that the Chinese were after was a place called Tawang. Now, so Tawang is here. There's a very famous Tibetan monastery there. So the Chinese wanted to take over Tawang and establish their claim over the Tibetan succession. So you have Lhasa, you have Tawang, you had the Dalai Lama, which you didn't have, and the story would have been complete. But it ran into a hiccup. And I'm pretty sure when His Holiness passes away, in a few days, some Chinese will yell, Eureka! A new Dalai Lama has been found in Tibet, because the whole process is some monk has to go and sit by the riverside and suddenly gets a vision that there is the Dalai Lama in some hilltop. They go looking for him, and a poor child is told, boss, Your Holiness for life. Okay. So that's how the Dalai Lama is anointed. Anyway, all that having been done, so the situation was getting right for a Chinese attack on India. And the Chinese then decided that enough is enough, but it has to come at a time when the world's attention is diverted. So on 5th of October, 1962, at a dinner in Moscow, as a farewell dinner for the Chinese ambassador, Khrushchev shook his hand and said, the time is right now. He conveyed to Mao. Why? Because on 19th October, the standoff started with China and US over the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the whole world was hung up on the Cuban Missile Crisis. And China went out to redefine the boundaries. Now this boundary, which you see, the McMahon line, had come into being, you see that McMahon line, had come into being In 1914, when Henry McMahon, after 8 attempts at the Shilpa Conference, 1913-14, got fed up because the Chinese guy was not agreeing to any demands. He said, I don't have permission from Peking, those days Peking. The Dalai Lama's representative came with reams and reams of map and information to say that what is the periphery of Tibet and what is the outer periphery and inner periphery of Tibet. So therefore, they were ready to agree and he signed on it. But the Chinese didn't. But there's a book by General J.J. Singh called the McMahon Line. And in that, there is a map with the signature of the Chinese representative. But the Chinese never acknowledged it because Mao's thumb rule was whatever happened before 1949 is a hang-up of history I don't recognize. But on the other hand, they insist on recognizing their historical claims on South China Sea, which is of 223 BC. So that is China for you. Anyway, so the McMahon, Henry McMahon was, as a character I told you, burnt in the furnace of South Asia. He, one fine day, you know how the British, they love ceremony, you know, two guys will come and draw the curtain. At the university I studied in England, Cambridge, there's a portrait of Oliver Cromwell. And he beheaded he basically did away with monarchy for a short while. But he studied at Sydney Sussex College in Cambridge. So when there is a toast proposed to the crown, so one porter walks up, so the British love ceremonies. So in full ceremonial order, he stretched out a map. He pulled out a felt pen, which some draftsman had, and he drew a line which came to be the McMahon line. I mean, basically based on data, you know, this hillock is with us and all, but it was on a thick pen on a very small map. So the pen's nib was so thick that it covered more than a village. So today when we say they are in our side of the McMahon line and they say we are on that bloody line is so thick because it runs on both sides of a village. Okay, it's the reality. So anyway, this line came to be. So Pandit Nehru, used to love to make these statements, and he said that, this is my border, map or no map. Now we have to settle the other border. Other border, the information came, the bloody Chinese are sitting there. So Nehru tried to hide it for a while. And after some time, it became, some journalists exposed that story. So it became a matter of debate in parliament. He says they are there, and I've ordered the army to throw the Chinese out. So the army chief learned of it sitting in his office, General Thimaya. And he drove up to Nehru's house and he says, sir, you haven't checked with me. Am I equipped? Am I prepared to throw them out? He says, these things are said in politics. He says, sir, I take offense, I resign. So Nehru said to him that if you resign in a moment like this, I will consider it an act of betrayal of national security. Thimaya had no choice. He pulled back his resignation. Next day, the news was Thimaya had resigned. But Nehru gave a rejoinder to that. He says, I had ordered him to take back his resignation, so he took it back. So Thimaya was neither here nor there. And there was another general. His name was General DDP Thorat. He was from Karnataka. His son later became one of the eminent bankers. General Thorat had done a full game. They call it in the army war game. And in the full war game, he had planned out that how, if the Chinese will attack and how we'll respond. It was called Operation Lal Killa. He gave the plans to Krishna Menon. Krishna Menon just put it aside. He says, you army men only talk of conflict. Interestingly, Rajiv Gandhi said the same to another general in Kashmir, that you army men only think of conflict. 30 years later, there's a conflict in Kashmir, and Rajiv Gandhi chose to ignore it. And the general who told him that told me that. Okay, anyway, having said all that, the Chinese decided to attack on 19th October. And they attacked us in two parts, one along the McMahon line and one along Aksai Chin. But the McMahon line, the attack was huge. And we suffered huge losses because Nehru and Krishna Menon put their lackey in charge of things there, a general called Biji Kaul. He was a comic character. And he had never fought a battle in life. You see, unlike corporate sector, where you can change from one big company to another, in the military, it's a very narrow path upwards. You need to know everything up the chain and how it happens. If you don't know, it will be exposed very soon. Sure enough, he deployed troops ahead of Tawang, in Bumla, in Namkachu, Longju, everywhere. The Chinese came and they rolled over our troops. And our troops fought well. Not one man retreated initially. When they ran out of ammunition, they fought with sticks and stones. But they died. They were without winter clothing. In the months of October, it's bloody cold out there, right? And they had cotton clothes. They didn't have proper ammunition. They didn't have vehicles. They were not getting airlift. We were not using the Air Force thinking that it'll upset the Chinese. So all set together, the Chinese made a lot of advances and they came down to the so-called outer line, 1914 now. And on this side, they also attacked us in Ladakh. But here there were two tough generals, General Daulat Singh and General Bikram Singh. And they drew the line. They said, we won't lose a post. So interestingly, we hadn't lost territory to the Chinese in the 62 conflict. The reverses were really in Nifa. And we had less troops fighting against the Chinese than we used in the Kargil conflict. The rest of the Indian army was sitting and waiting to be called out to go to war. Nehru didn't want to up the force levels, thinking it will further upset the Chinese. I don't know how much more upset they'd get once they've already got into your country. They didn't want to use the Air Force because the Air Force gave an assessment to say, give us the permission, we'll go and bomb the hell out of them in Tibet. But the Chinese had put dummy aircrafts there. So the pictures that came, they had so many aircrafts, but aircrafts had no engine. They were just cardboard bodies. And when you're in high altitude, you fly with half your fuel, half your ammunition load. You can't take off because of high altitude. Even ammunition in cold weather misbehaves. So normally a rocket. But we kind of stuck it out here. There were some ferocious battles that were fought. One of the most famous ones, which the Pakistan Army studies as a case study, is the Battle of Rezangla, which was fought by a guy. His father also knew something about him when he named him. His name was Shaitan Singh. He fought like the devil. And 112 men with him, 110 died in their position. But they apparently killed 800 Chinese. So, Rezangla is right at the bottom. But he was from 13 Kumaon, got a Paramveer Chakra. For many months, people thought these guys had just stuck it out and were hanging on their own, because all the posts are winter stocked with food and all that. But later, there was no news from them for more than a month or something. Then people went to find out and they found all of them dead, holding on to their weapons, including the nursing assistant was having a syringe in his hand to give somebody a morphine shot. So these guys fought it out. They were defending the India they were told to defend. Our politicians were playing games of chess. They weren't sure what they should do, what they shouldn't do. Any case, after the war, there was an inquiry carried out. The inquiry was ordered by General Chaudhary, who succeeded General Thapar as chief. General Thapar was Karan Thapar's father. And General Thapar watched it up. So did a whole lot of other generals. General Bogi Sen, who succeeded General Thorat in Eastern Command. General Monty Palit, who was Director of Military Operations. General Jogi Dhillon. Whole lot of them. And they just didn't take action. Later they were asked why. They said nobody was listening to us. They said, no, just get over. It's just a 5-7 days skirmish with the Chinese. It lasted exactly a month. And the day the Cuban Missile Crisis ended, the next day China unilaterally declared ceasefire and pulled back from all the gains they had made. That's another strange thing, which I also don't have an answer for. Except this line, 5960 claim line, which they were claiming even before the war. So even now when Galwan happened, they said, let's settle it over claim line. Because in 5960, the Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai came to India, visited India. We told India that let's do a deal. Let us keep upside. But Nehru was not listening. Just like Nehru was not listening to anything. And eventually, when the war got over, he called General Thorat back from retirement to consider appointing him as chief after Thapar resigned. He says, why didn't any of you tell me that? He says, sir, I gave the file to Krishna Menon, it's lying on your table. He wasn't willing to listen. And Nehru thumped his hand on the table. He says, Menon, Menon, Menon. All of you are after Menon. And that was the end of Thorat's chance of becoming chief, but a good man. Anyway, the man who succeeded General Thapar was General Chaudhary, J.N. Chaudhary. He ordered one person called Henderson Brooks, Lieutenant General Henderson Brooks, who was an Anglo-Indian of the Maratha regiment, to carry out a study with later Lieutenant General Prem Bhagat, who was the living Victoria Cross. And Bhagat's citation had said in the Second World War, in African campaign, the king awarded him the Victoria Cross, which is like the Paramveer Chakra, for the longest act of sheer cold courage. For 96 hours, single-handedly, he hung in front of a tank and cleared a minefield. So Bhagat was a very respected man. And they put together this report. This report is still classified, but my book has a chapter on it because there's enough in the public domain to draw conclusion. But after that, the Indian Army decided that we won't ever let this thing happen again, and war is too serious a business to be left to politicians. Okay. So, on 2 occasions, in 1967, the Chinese again started to browbeat us at Nathula, which is the head of Sikkim, with loudspeakers. Remember 62, we will do it to you again. But there was a tough Rajput general who was in Nathula. He told his troops, he says, stick it out, cut off the bloody phone lines to Delhi. And he says, when they attack, he says, send dead bodies back. I don't want a single prisoner going back. So 382 Chinese were killed. But on the first day, the Chinese had let fly machine gun fire on our troops that were demarcating the border. So about 78 or 80 of ours died. Later, Sagat Singh was asked, why did you do what you did? But good for Sagat Singh, his boss was Manek Shah. So Manek Shah Mrs. Gandhi was getting upset. He just sidelined Sagat Singh. He says, wait, your time will come again. 4 years later, he was the first man to enter Dhaka. So how these people, history makes them historical characters or men of war. By the way, he also liberated Goa. So one of those guys who figures in history books again and again. So the Chinese shut up for 20 years after that. They got a bloody nose. Then in 86, they moved in again at Sumdrongchu, and they parked themselves and lit fires and were giving looks to our troops. And this General Sundarji himself told me. He said, when he got the news, he told the corps commander there, his name was General Narhari. Narhari was hard as rock. A corps commander is a lieutenant general. He commands about 70,000 troops. Okay. He says, Nar, he says, sort them out. So we flew, We flew troops from Arunachal Pradesh by helicopter, surrounded the Chinese. And Rajiv Gandhi was told on the 4th of December, Navy Day, at a tea party in the Navy Chief's house that we've surrounded the Chinese. So Rajiv was not a man of war, so he flapped. He asked Sundarji, what have you done? So he says, I've done what is my job. He says, let's all meet in the operations room in South Block. So he gathered there. So he asked Sundarji, he says, General, what have you done? So he says, what is our policy on China? And somebody from the group of ministers said in a very Bengali accent that Madame's policy was don't upset the Chinese. Rajiv looked at him and mimicked him. Now, where did Madame get this policy from? The person says, from Panditji. So for Rajiv, I swear, Sundarji told me this in Washington one night. After everyone's gone after dinner, he said, Maruf, let's sit, I'll tell you a few stories. And you know, he was my chief, Colonel Commandant. And I had by then left the army, but my father had served with him. He was a character, you know, Sundarji. And he became more and more articulate after drinks inside. Right? So he said, so Rajiv looked at him. He said, General, we can't upset the Chinese. He says, sir, I have given orders. I am not going to order them to pull back. I will lose face. So I would request you to find somebody else to implement your orders. May I have your permission to leave? His ADC also told me that. Plabon, who was my Paltan officer, he was a Bengali, but he was not as stupid as the other Bengali minister. And I'm not writing down Bengalis. My mother was a Bengali, so I have a soft spot for Bengali. So he says, sir, wo Sundarji jab bolta tha na, kehta ye sab, their mouth was only open. They couldn't grasp the speed with which he was articulating the battlefield scenario. Luckily for India, the Chinese panicked. And Sundarji said, he said, where are your troops? They said, they are all around them. And they can either shower bullets on them or you know what. So the Chinese panicked and pulled back. And it saved the day. Later they say when Rajiv Gandhi went to Beijing, all these bloody Congress spokesmen went to Beijing, you know, we started a new era in Indo-China relations. What bloody new era? We've had, I don't know how many rounds of joint working group talks, special representative talks, and what have you. And as I've often said, these talks have yielded nothing because our delegations that go there are too busy doing sightseeing and eating chow mein. You know? So that is the state of Indian foreign policy. As far as Sino-Indian relations, they remain like this. I want to make one or two last points because I've spoken for 40 minutes, 5 minutes I'm authorized now. So one is that, you see, in the 80s, we were about on par as economies and we could take on the Chinese and do a swap deal or whatever deal that's. Now we are not. So when you approach a negotiation in a confrontational situation, you have to have some advantage that you bring on the table. Otherwise, what is the other guy going to give or take? Secondly, the Chinese today are very keen to rule the world. So they are not going to slow down with anything that comes in their way. I mean, they don't even, I remember I was in a conference in, what's that place in the US, near Lake Michigan, I'm forgetting Illinois. And the Chinese didn't come for the conference with Indians because they said we only sit for conferences with the US. India is too small for us to sit and discuss. Talking of the 90s. So therefore, the Chinese are very full of themselves. They have an agenda. They negotiate with you. Everyone is indoctrinated to negotiate on their terms. But what has shaken them is our response in Galwan. Because you see, all the other territory that we lost in the past, all the other territory, they had already occupied that. So when the Indian army got into place, like the Indian army getting into play in J&K, Pakistan had already occupied that. And the Britishers orchestrated Pakistan's occupation of that territory because the British wanted Pakistan to have a say in the future of J&K because they felt that J&K should have been an autonomous territory. And those of you who've read my jointly authored earlier book called Kashmir's Untold Story would see that I have, with my co-author, brought out what the British agenda was. They basically wanted control of what they call POK, or the northern areas. And those areas are the ones ahead of Daulat Beg Oldi, that area, because from here, the British were setting up monitoring stations to monitor Russia's nuclear plan. And the whole history of British interests against China, Tibet, Pakistan is all rooted around the British fear of Russian expansion into the subcontinent. Later, of course, they gave them POK. We were glad we had the valley because Sheikh Abdullah told Pandit Nehru that the valley is with me and I'm with you, so what is there to fear? So we stopped further military initiatives to take back POK. There was a time when Pakistan was in retreat, you could have done it. There was a time when we had taken over East Pakistan. Some people expressed to Mrs. Gandhi that why don't we make it a state of India? So she said to him, there's a politician who told me, he says, ye 60 million nahi samal rahe, wo aur 60 million leke kya karungi? You can draw inferences from what she said. So in the case of China and India, what are China's interests in Aksai Chin? Now, the waters of Aksai Chin, because the Aksai Chin, the rivers that come from there, have huge amount of water. And China has spent $26 billion in setting up 5 dams in POK. They are called Bunji Dam, Daimar Bhasha Dam, Tartok Dam, and two others, I can't remember. Those dams have to keep static water, and fresh static water mixed with the sands of the Taklamakan Desert, which is next to Xinjiang, with chemicals gives you silicon wafers. And every 10,000 liters of static water mixed with sand and chemicals give you 30 centimeters square of silicon wafer, about this size. And that gives you small, small microchips. So you're not getting Aksai Chin back. So any politician or otherwise does chest thumping and says, "Hamara hai, leke rakhenge." मैंने कहा कि जमीन पे जाके देखो, एक बार मेरे को पाकिस्तानी हाई कमिश्नर मिले थे एक लंच में, ये साहब कश्मीर तो हम लेके रखेंगे। मैंने कहा साहब आप गए हैं उधर? कहता नहीं साहब। I said go there, see the bloody LOC. I said to climb those posts धुआं निकल जाता है। I said by the time you reach there you won't even have the stamina to shout dhawa and attack on the enemy. You'll give up there. So I said ख्वाब मत देखिए. But Pakistani's leaders have done nothing to build the nation and national culture together. So they keep hoping that one day India will give up Kashmir. Not in my lifetime. As far as China is concerned, not in my lifetime will we get Aksai Chin. We won't. We can't. And I don't think we will have the military capacity to beat China to it and take it. And take it and do bloody what? We have enough uranium and thorium. It's another matter. We don't exploit it in our country. If you use used uranium and mix it with India's thorium deposit, you can go into the next stage of nuclear development. India can be electricity and power excess, sell it to the world, at least to the neighborhood. But you have to invest in the right direction. And the lobbies that pull out coal from the Indian ground and buy petroleum to give you diesel-related electricity, don't let the government invest in next phase of nuclear development. We have enough natural resources. We just don't exploit it. We have enough shale gas. We don't exploit it. Anyway, having said that, Galwan was a shocker to China. And the difference was that the Indian soldier is willing to die. The Chinese soldier comes from one-child family, doesn't want to die. The Indian soldier comes from villages where he's looking for his portrait in town hall. And the infantry units of the Indian Army, like 16 Bihar, which doesn't have much of a history before that, and there are many more illustrious and ruthless units of the Indian Army. A lot of people there are trained to kill with their bare hands. So the Ministry of External Affairs says bulletless border. It will remain a bulletless border, but we'll still bloody kill. Okay, so that is where we are at. China has economic advantages over us. We are late starters in everything, including the economy. We are dependent on 92% of Chinese pharmaceuticals. We are dependent on Chinese televisions, cell phones, air conditioners, etc. So unless we wean ourselves away from those weaknesses of ours, we can't give it back to the Chinese. China also makes over $50 billion every year with a trade surplus with India. That's the money they put into Pakistan over a 10-year period and have bought Pakistan out. And we are giving it to them every year. So if you stop trading with China, China won't get that money. And I always believe as an importer, you have an advantage, not as an exporter. Finally, and most importantly, China is not going to let you come on the top of the table in any world forum. I have often said, there is a speech of mine that became quite viral in February 2017 when I said how India can become a great power. I said, you have to kick the door open in the UN Security Council, walk in, pull a chair and sit down and say, I'm not going out. And he says, you want me to go out? Then I walk out of the UN. But the problem is our diplomats and bureaucrats will lose their UN postings. So they say, ho, 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 what about our commitment to the world? Who gives a shit? Just China give a hoot about the commitments it has made to the world. Ye sab jo hai na, on one side, Mr. Modi said in the papers today that our entire British influenced educational system is alien, not good for us. Then a lot of these things are also, we've been influenced by the past. They're not good for us. Say so and get out. And say, reform yourself, give us a seat. We are 1/6 of humanity. Why should we have the same vote as Seychelles and Fiji Islands? Put us with the big powers, or we don't want to deal with you. And I believe if you say it, they'll open the door. I'll end here, ladies and gentlemen, because I've done my time. Right? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maruf Raza. That was really enlightening. So yeah, you can have a seat. We will be opening this up for Q&A. But before that, I'd like to invite Mr. Kumar, who's the chair of the Coimbatore chapter, to please have a seat and moderate the session.
Good evening, everybody. So, sir, I think we were the last session of the day, and I think attention was at its best. You know, I think you had the audience in rapt attention. Can I say so, guys? Yes? Yeah. So I should also say that we are standing between dinner, being the last session. I think we have a party coming up later tonight, but we will take a few questions for sure. And so this is the book, guys. It has 9 chapters. I think what sir gave us today was a small nutshell of what it is about. A lot of anecdotes. So it's called Contested Lands, India, China, and the Boundary Dispute. So I had a couple of questions, but I'm just going to ask one question and then open it out to the audience. So, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we are in a democracy where every 5 years, the political view can change. China has a 30-year policy that happens. How do you really counter that? And the second part is there's the India-Pakistan economic corridor happening. And what is India doing to really counter? Are we doing anything as general public? Probably we're not seeing it. What's happening on that front?
Well, both of them have simple answers. You want to be like China, abandon democracy.
I'm sure many in the room will like that answer here.
I know We are all, as I said on one TV show to Rahul Shivshankar, it was a show about a film that I had made for Times Now. It's there on Amazon called Kashmir, the story. I said, we are mesmerized by our democratic credentials. We think America may be father of modern democracy, but we are the largest democracy, so the world should be clapping for us whenever we walk in. Quite frankly, the world looks at other parameters to judge you. You know, voting is only the first step in a democracy. There are many other responsibilities that you have to fulfill as a nation, and you have to deliver on those counts. Every citizen of your country has to have a better life than he or she has. Xi Jinping has done that. You go to in 2012 or thereabouts, you read one of his speeches, and he said that, you know, every village I went to, I found the roads were not there, electricity was not there. And 2020, he says, go and see the villages. Beautifully connected, everything is sorted out. I often tell people that Singapore and Dubai don't have democracies. But do you have people complaining there? As against the Nara for Azadi that comes in Kashmir Valley and all that. You know, we like these noises. People in the government has told me when there are noises like this, we feel happy, democracy is alive. We're a bunch of bloody delusionists. I'm sorry to say. I enjoy the freedom of speech. If I said these things in Pakistan or China, this is the last you'd see of me. But having said that, we got to get real here. You know, what is it that you want? So I think I would say democracy, let it be in the shadow. Show development, show growth, better education, better opportunities for people, and that's much better. As far as China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, you see, it's a signature initiative of Xi Jinping, the president of China. He wanted to leave his mark in the world. Some years ago, The Economist wrote that he had designated $1.1 trillion for it. And the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was one of the flagship initiatives of that. But that has become, that is a two-sided weapon. Because a lot of Pakistanis, the Dawn newspaper in particular, has written about the fact that how China has established a kind of web of cyber networks around wherever it passes. So there'll come a time almost every city in Pakistan would be monitored by China, and China is very good at web monitoring. Two, China wants this corridor as an import-export corridor to get fuel from Gulf, shortest route, get it up, because India could block Chinese fuel carriers through the Straits of Malacca. I've just done a TV show where a former naval admiral confirmed to me that we have many advantages. There's no way they can get past the Straits of Malacca if we don't want them, which is near Singapore and all that stuff. Third, China is using that to create energy plants through the waters in the dam, but not to sell energy to Pakistan, but to send it to Xinjiang and other places. Because those are regions which are rested. And Chinese view is, perhaps it's a bit right, that if you improve the lot of the people, then people will not people stop agitating. So that is the China-Pakistan. What have we done? We've said we don't recognize it. Good, you don't recognize it. What is your counter to that? We were looking for Japan to bail us out. And now the Americans have announced something under the G7, another 100 billion there. So all those initiatives will come because the West is looking for one flag bearer of democracy. That's where your democracy helps.
The Quad would also help this, I presume. The Quad.
See, I am a securities commentator, but Quad is an overrated initiative, right? The only country in Quad that has a border with China is us. If the shit hits the fan, it will fall on us. Okay. It's not going to go to the Americans or the Australians. They're too far away. Some of it may be on Japan. So therefore, if you work on these assumptions, like Nehru worked on these assumptions in 62, that America will come and bail me out. America said, boss, jab tumko humne apne rap mein bulaya tha, we were asking you part of an America-led alliance system. You were too haughty to join us. Why the hell should we come to you? You get demolished, trashed, then we'll give you PL 488. That's what happened.
So on that note, I'd like to open the floor to a few questions. I think three questions should be good. Please. Can we have a mic here, please?
Mr. Raja, I'm Francis from Mizoram chapter. We know about the Chinese string of pearls policy, and we know about the Chinese debt trap encircling India. Especially from that region, we see across the border many Chinese activities since the state has two international borders, that is Bangladesh and Myanmar. Even now, there's a lot of the hell going on with have lots of refugees in flux. And in this situation, what do you think India should do to counter this Chinese threat?
Which part of India? Northeast.
Yes, or around, or taking into consideration the geopolitics of that region.
You see, again, I go back to a point I made earlier, this whole obsession with technology. People think you put tech on all our borders and we'll be able to monitor people. I have seen how battlefield surveillance radars work. You just see white or black characters coming through the snow-clad mountains. You don't know if they are yours. You don't know if they are yours or they are somebody else's. Likewise, we have some radar systems and all out there. But you see, the Chinese work differently. They're not going to enter your country. They'll just enter your neighboring country. So 75 to 80% of Bangladesh military systems come from China. Why? Because when they wanted it, we didn't want to give it to them. We thought they'll be a threat to us. I mean, Myanmar was in Chinese pocket. Once in a while, we get a message that, they are leaning towards us and all that stuff. But who runs Myanmar? The generals. And the generals obviously have more in common with the Communist Party than the democracy-led alliances here. So Myanmar, and basically China has made an investment there of $34 billion of that pipeline, Sitwe to right up top. At the end of the day, it's deep pockets. I had once argued, and in many writings thereafter, that we put more than $2 billion into Afghanistan. Why? Because Manmohan Singh was thinking that he'll get high table rights and possibly a Nobel Peace Prize. But the Brits and the Americans didn't even let us into the room. And now they all kicked out of there, and your good friends, the Pakistanis, are there. You think they'll bloody well give you the time of the day on there? No. If that money was put into Nepal, in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, they'd be kissing your toes. So we, like I say about the Americans, we also not short of pundits in our country. In America, I say to them, you have more think tanks than the British Army has tanks. But you always get it wrong. The same with us. These are all rarefied areas of policy making where people are not willing to listen to lesser mortals like me. Not that I give a shit. I just say what I have to. You read it, you don't read it, it is to your peril. But people are, a simple thing like having a clear policy towards China. You want to settle it. Even now, after Galwan, they said, take the 5960 line, give us Aksai Chin, you settle with Arunachal. Not an inch of Indian territory is negotiable. Have you bloody well gone and seen those inches of Indian territory? You haven't. So why are you making these long-standing, grandstanding announcements? See, if you think you are a leader with a big following and you have a stand, have you heard of a South African leader called de Klerk? Well, none of you have heard of him, sadly. But some of you may have. He took a historic decision. He did away with apartheid. And history will remember him for that. History wouldn't have remembered him for 3 tenures as Prime Minister. So that is the decision that one has to take. That I will settle a dispute forever. And I will get on with then decreasing military spending and putting into something else. But if you don't, you can keep giving it new and new names or new and new terminologies. But bottom line is you are spending on defense. I don't believe that we can decrease our defense spending any more than it has done already, where we are scraping the bottom of the barrel, and defend India. And if you have to defend India, there are two ways to do it. One is to enhance your troop levels. Second is to decrease your threat levels. Take a call.
Very interesting viewpoint, sir. So the next question, yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
To probably gain some ground on Pakistan, and at the same time, what can we expect from China? Because some of our waters, again, are sourced, come in from China, especially like Brahmaputra coming in from Tibet, and again, the northern part of the Indus.
Well, China can do more for Pakistan than Pakistan can do for itself. And India cannot divert the rivers that go to Pakistan. We give this nonsense about limit being restricted to treaties, the Indus Water Treaty of September 1960, where we agreed to give them 80.52% of the waters and keep 19.48. But even that bloody 19.48, we are not able to use properly. And as far as what goes to Pakistan, we have I say this with a sense of responsibility, we have no system in place to divert those rivers within India. So you can't stop, and river waters, see what happens when floods come. You can't stop them. So you have to put together a plan to actually start harnessing the waters, at least what is your due. Then look at taking what is with going to Pakistan. And Pakistan keeps saying India is making us go dry. It is bad water management in Punjab of Pakistan, which is their holy land, right? And all the water goes waste, so that by the time the river reaches Sindh and all that, it runs dry. It's not because we are making them go dry. Yes, China can do a few things with Brahmaputra, but let's not attribute too much to China also and their abilities. After all, whatever they're doing in Brahmaputra, they're doing whatever they can. We don't have a waters treaty with China. They're a riparian state, so they have advantages. So they can twist our tail a bit, but again, not too much. Shifting rivers around is very difficult. There's a book by Brahmachalani called Water Wars. You should read that. You'll get more insight into it.
Thank you so much, sir. Sorry, but then I just received the sheet. Maybe one last question. I think Mitanshu raised his hand, so we'll close with that. And then sir is available after in case anybody has any questions.
My name is Mitanshu Shah. I just want to ask, as you said, Indian military had upper hand in the conflicts where they had the experience and knowledge about a war coming and all. But why the Indian military is always under civilian government or under political system? At the current.
This question will get the backup of a lot of people. But I've done a book on civil-military relations, so I know the subject. I can only say to you that, you see, democracies, one of the pillars of democracy is the military works under political civilian leadership. No democracy worth its name has a military that is more powerful than the establishment. Two, amongst the screw-ups that Nehru did, one of the good things he did was he put the military tightly under civilian control. Three, only those officers rise to the top who are spineless, so they don't take on the system, right? Four, if the military takes on the country, India would become like Pakistan. Do you want that? So we are better off the way we are. And as China is concerned, what intrigued me that since World War I, at least up to now, 100 years, in every campaign, Indian military has acquitted itself with distinction. I mean, the British swear by the Indian military contribution in World War I and II. Srinath Raghavan's written a book on World War II called India's War. We had put more soldiers there than anybody else. We did terrific jobs in 47, 48, in 65, 71, even Kargil. Except for 62, when they were not allowed to fight, because the political directives was don't confront the Chinese, just back off. And when they did confront, they died in the process because they were so ill-equipped. So we were almost structured to lose. But if you see, other than that, Mrs. Gandhi learned from her father's debacle. Therefore, she gave the military a full free hand in 71. And you saw the results. Again, in Kargil, the military was given a free hand, but Vajpayee laid out the term of reference that don't cross the LOC. Otherwise, we were just on the top of those hills ready to roll down into POK. But we were told not to go. So, Indian military respects the constitution, and it has a covenant with the state that we respect the constitution. We'll appreciate if the state respects us. That's it.
On that note, sir, on the might and values of our military, I just like to request our National Chair Raunak to come forward. So, sir would like to hand over a signed copy of his book for you, Raunak. So one round of applause, guys, for Major here. Thank you so much, sir. It really was a pleasure. And I think we look forward to hosting you at many more such YI events in the future.
Yeah, we have a memento for Mr. Maruf Raza. I'd like to invite Pujita from YI Bangalore to please hand it over. I request all the audience to please stay back for a few minutes. For a few minutes. Yeah.
So can I have Dilip and Viral on the stage, please? No, it'll take more than a minute, just 2 or 3 minutes, please. So, at the beginning of the year, when we were deciding the theme for the year, and we finalized on YI Utsav as the theme for this year, we added 3 words to Utsav. One was excellence, the second was collaboration, and the third one is significance. Great, you guys know it. So, then we decided, let's celebrate excellence, collaboration, and significance. And a crazy idea came. Let's do summits. Not 1, not 2, but 3 throughout the year. The first one we did in Calcutta, DBM. How many of you were part of it? Did you guys have fun? So that was the power of excellence. The second one, power of collaboration, Utkarsh, with 9 chapters planning this whole event. Are you guys ready for the next one? Can we have the AV, please?
I am Gujarat. I am the land of risk takers, entrepreneurs, innovators, and disruptors. While the entire country was still in the shackles of British Empire, I gave birth to the father of Indian industry. when the entire world was grappled in wars. I had shown the world the path of non-violence and truth. When the entire India was disintegrated by territories and princely states, I had united and integrated India. I had spearheaded and revolutionized India to become the world's largest producer of milk. When the economically advanced economies were engaged in exploration of moon and planets, I became the cradle of space program to solve the real problems of man and society. I am the land of world-famous industries. In my soil, many notable educational institutes are creating the leaders for tomorrow. In Gujarat, we live, love, laugh and celebrate. And hence I am the land of world's longest dance celebrations, Garba. I am Gujarat. I am the lion-shaped state. I am ready to roar. I am ready to host the Young Indians National Summit 2022, 30th September to 2nd October 2022, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. Come on, Dhokla, Fafda and Jalebi. The taste of Gujarat is waiting for you.
So, are you guys ready to witness the power of significance? Can I have Viral to brief about the event, please?
Hi everyone. I know it's been a long day here at Utkarsh 2022. I am here on behalf of VIA Ahmedabad, inviting all of you to join us on 30th of September for the biggest to join us for 30th September for the 9-day festival that goes around in Ahmedabad. We're going to have a Garba night, 1.5 day of great speakers, good content, and delicious Gujarati food stored for all of you there. So I request all of you to join us this time with spouses, because we're going to have our own exclusive VIA Garba. The Garba is going to be only for VIA members. So I request everyone to join us with spouses so they can have the most fun out of it. Thank you guys. With spouses, not only spouses. Yeah, only spouses. If you want to get your girlfriends, that's fine. That's not a worry. But make sure you get permissions from your wives, please.
Dilip.